Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. It's John O'Loughlin. We are here at McDuff Lives, and it's March 16th, 2026. I am glad to share with you some thoughts on this interesting and really devilish problem we have with a secret government running our country. How did it happen? And what can we do about it? Well, we've got a lot of interesting material here that's been dug up by the team at Executive Intelligence Review, Edward Spanos and others. I'm going to read some selections today about how George H.W. Bush created the secret government, the government that seems to be pulling the strings behind everything. When somebody like Trump promises there's going to be no war and then he goes into a war, why? I submit it is because of the secret government that is secretly controlling the government of the United States ever since the coup of November 22nd, 1963, when we lost our last legitimate president. All right, let's get into it. And a warm welcome to everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. Of course, McDuff is a name that we have adopted here at the channel to us, kind of a pseudonym for my dad, whose secret work at the Pentagon has been the subject of a study that I've been doing now for about 8 years. What did my dad do in the war or the Cold War? Might be a way to put it. But why is it that I'm so driven to find the answer? It's not about my dad or me or my family. It's about this country. It's about the fact that this country got hijacked, and the hijackers are still in control. They're still in control. Why? How else can you explain the fact that no matter who we vote for, we end up in a war? No matter who we vote for, our currency gets devalued. No matter who we vote for, they're going to do what their program is, and we are just left in the sidelines watching it go by without feeling that we have any power whatsoever. And of course, then we get divided against each other, which is their game. They want us divided, so we'll never really penetrate the layer of the secret government. But we are not giving up. As a matter of fact, we're fighting back, and we're going to fight back together as we study this material this morning. I'm going to start with an article from Executive Intelligence Review, and I have to give them credit for working very, very hard over many decades to record things that otherwise would not have been written down. The connection to my dad's office is really shocking to me. Not shocking. It's sad because President Kennedy created SACSA, my dad's office, in order to take the special operations away from Alan Dulles and his cronies at the CIA, who were working for basically corporate and fascist type entities, the same types that were tried to do the coup back in 1933. And I would say that they have effected a coup with the assassination of President Kennedy. Of course, it's been very subtle the way that they have worked their way into control. George H.W. Bush is the key to understanding this. However, we have to do the homework. We have to study the material. And so I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of articles from Executive Intelligence Review. The first one kind of ties my dad's story into the same idea that parts of the Pentagon were used to subvert the government by George H.W. Bush. And I'm going to share this article with you so you can see it. You can stop it and look at it. However, you can always find it at Executive Intelligence Review. All right, let's get it up there. All right, Edward Spanos and Nancy Spanos are a couple of the real heroes that came out of the LaRouche organization. They are now independent. They've been independent for some time, but they are great researchers and writers, and I follow their books. And anyway, Edward Spanos is the author of this particular one, which just touches me directly. You'll see why when I read it. This is June 12th, 1992. EIR secret Pentagon unit was involved in 1986 raid against LaRouche by Edward Spanos. A little bit bigger. Investigators are currently probing the role of the U.S. Defense Department's Special Operations Command, which specializes in covert operations and counterterrorism, in the 1986 government raid against facilities in Leesburg, Virginia, associated with Lyndon LaRouche. The Special Operations Unit has also been linked to the Iran-Contra operation run by Oliver North and Richard Secord. And if you look at my previous Undo the Coup edition, watch that one for the background on that and how this all ties together with Iran-Contra and George Bush's drug dealing. The disclosure of military involvement in a domestic criminal case further shows the flagrant illegality of the government's conduct in the LaRouche case. By law, the military units involved cannot be engaged in domestic law enforcement or domestic covert operations. The Pentagon's involvement in the October 6th to 7th, 1986 raid was disclosed in a partially declassified set of documents recently obtained from the FBI under FOIA. The correspondence between the FBI and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, JCS, concerned an FBI request for declassification of information pertaining to the initial storage of records seized in the 1986 raid. That is, LaRouche's home was raided, as you know, by our nemesis, our Robert Mueller, acting in the same way that he did to Roger Stone much more recently. And of course, LaRouche went to jail, and a number of his associates went to jail. Mike Billington went to jail, more than I can name. Charges about trying to evade taxes in a loan situation that really should not have led to serious criminal accusations. But as we know, it was a political, or as I think we can show, it was a political prosecution from the start in order to shut him up about the things that we are reading right now. The truckloads of documents were seized during the Leesburg raid, as well as in which well over 400 federal agents, state police officers, and others took part. At the same time as the search warrants were executed, indictments were issued in Boston against 12 individuals and 5 organizations, including LaRouche's 1984 Presidential Campaign Committee. The defendants in the ensuing criminal proceedings were initially told that the documents had been taken to Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI had a training academy alongside a U.S. Marine Corps base. And in fact, my dad, as an FBI agent, attended the Quantico FBI Training Academy and took us to the FBI picnics over at Quantico when we were very young children. However, in the spring of 1988, During the trial in Boston, prosecutors disclosed that the seized records had actually been stored at Henderson Hall, a Marine Corps building adjacent to Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia. The newly disclosed documents show part of the process in the declassification of information regarding Henderson Hall. First is an FBI message dated March 31st, 1988. The message cites a telephone call to LTC, name deleted, JSOC, and enclosed a letter with instructions to hand carry to JSOC for their formal declassification. JSOC is the Joint Special Operations Command. We all know that now, but this is the very beginning of JSOC. JSOC was created in December 1980 to coordinate the counter-terrorist activities of the various services. In other words, it's kind of replacing SACSA, if you remember what SACSA was created to do, particularly the Army's Delta Force and the Navy Commando Unit SEAL Team 6. Yes, that's SEAL Team 6. JSOC was based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, until 1987. JSOC is in a domestic investigation. The reader might wonder, what does something like JSOC have to do with an allegedly domestic law enforcement investigation? The reference letter, stamped secret, was addressed to Colonel David K. Sims, Chief Support Activities Branch, J3 Special Operations Division, Office of JCS, Room 2C840, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The letter begins, a request for DoD assistance was made by the FBI in support of a criminal investigation with deleted information. The deleted portion is officially withheld as information, quote, concerning military plans, weapons or operations, and intelligence operations, including special activities. Remember, special activities, counterinsurgency and special activities, or intelligence sources or methods, the release of which would damage national security. Always the great excuse, isn't it? And 10/2, the NSC, plausible deniability. Executive order. The FBI letter requests declassification of the rest of DoD at the request of DoD for a secure location, and the location was Henderson Hall. Initial contact with LTC blank indicated no problem was foreseen. What these two sensitive information deletions show is that there is something more beyond the Henderson Hall information, which pertains to the LaRouche investigation and which is still classified on national security grounds. Okay. During 1984 to 87, JSOA, that is the Joint Special Operations Agency, which was created to coordinate counterterrorism and special operations within the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay, this is 1984. This is the inheritor of the SACSA mantle that was created by JFK. The branches included in JSOA, SOD, were unconventional warfare, psychological operations, and civil affairs, contingency operations, support activities, etc. In 1987, with the creation of the Unified Special Ops Command, the SOD was returned to the J3 Operations Directorate. SOD existed at SACSA when my dad was alive. That is until his death in 1971. I have a condolence note, which was probably attached to some flowers or something, to my mother from SOD. So, direct connection. However, this is 14 years later, right? Focal point system. As the listing of functions implies, this Pentagon's Special Operations Division is a continuation of the old Office of Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, SACSA. created in the 1950s, it says, as the CIA point of contact or focal point within the Office of Secretary of Defense. We know that SACSA was created in 1962. However, there was an entity run by Edward Lansdale in the 50s under the Dulles brothers that was similar and perhaps thought of as a precursor to SACSA. Under Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, it was moved into the Joint Staff. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, in his book, The Secret Team, describes SACSA as almost entirely CIA-oriented, with very few military responsibilities. The focal point system, according to Prouty, allowed the CIA to use military communication channels to send messages back and forth, with only cleared personnel having access to these communications. The military special operations forces were downgraded during the 70s, but were built back up during the early years of the Reagan administration. The Army SOD has been described as the Pentagon's CIA, and it provided largely hidden covert operations capability outside the CIA. See what's going on here? It's the subversion of Kennedy's plan to control special ops, and in fact, creating out of the ashes of the legitimate SACSA, a new one oriented towards the secret government's activities and not those ordered by the Congress or the American people. Skipping forward, a military intelligence expert observed the following concerning Executive Order 12333, the 1981 directive which permitted covert intelligence operations within the United States. Yes, Executive Order 12333, signed by Ronald Reagan, but put in front of him by George H.W. Bush. The 1981 directive, which permitted covert intelligence operations within the United States, EO 12333, he pointed out, only pertains to the intelligence components of the military. Strictly speaking, even EO 12333 would not legalize domestic activity on the part of operational components of the military. One further point about the FBI JSC letter bears comment. The letter was sent to the chief of the SOD's Support Activities Branch. The functions of this unit are officially listed as providing the DoD point of contact with government agencies for sensitive support and sensitive operations, and as providing the, quote, focal point for a special communications channel within the worldwide communications system, unquote. Yeah, a secret comm system like George Webb talks about the Blackberries, right? Historically, the focal point system meant that when the CIA or perhaps another intelligence agency needed logistical support from the DoD, the request was to go through the focal point office. All right, now I'm not going to continue this article. I just wanted to make that context there that you see that what Kennedy wanted to have was the counterinsurgency that is the legitimate Army doctrine of winning hearts and minds by protecting the local people and supporting their infrastructure and making sure they had safe food and water and things like that, as opposed to the Ed Lansdale / British intelligence method, which is really just terrorism. So that was the first one that I wanted to share with you, kind of just a personal connection with my father and why they needed to get rid of my father, because they had these plans that they were going to take over everything with a secret government. Well, that's speculation, but Here's another one I want to bring to your attention. This one is a 1996 article. I'll share it with you in a second. All right, and this is Edward Spanhouse, 1996, November 29th, 1996. So what, 10 years later. Crack cocaine probe zeroes in on George Bush Executive Order 12333. At a raucous town meeting in South Central Los Angeles on November 15th, Director of Central Intelligence John Deutsch promised that he would investigate allegations that George Bush ran privatized intelligence operations under the authority of Executive Order 12333 as part of the CIA's investigation into Contra drug running into the United States in the 1980s. However, a few days later in San Diego, federal prosecutors succeeded in suppressing evidence relating to a government-sponsored privatized covert operations. In the sentencing proceeding involving convicted drug dealer Ricky Ross. Don't know if you remember Freeway Ricky Ross. Although the Justice Department may believe that getting Ross's sentencing out of the way eliminates one vulnerable flank with respect to the allegations of U.S. government involvement in the spread of illegal drugs in the 80s, there is no sign of any let-up in the ferment that has grown up in the wake of the San Jose Mercury News series in August. In fact, Deutsch's appearance in Los Angeles seems only to have intensified the anger in the Black community over government stonewalling on the drug issue. At the same time, the issue of George Bush's overall culpability is assuming more and more prominence. Deutsch goes to Watts. Deutsch appeared before a town meeting of over 600 people in the Watts area of Los Angeles, which was organized by Representative Juanita Millender McDonald to respond to allegations of CIA involvement in sparking the crack cocaine epidemic. In his opening statement, Deutsch portrayed the CIA as being in the forefront of the fight against drugs. Quote, "No one who runs a government agency can allow such an allegation to stand," he said. "I will get to the bottom of it," quote unquote. After Deutsch's opening statement, the floor was open for questions, which ranged from thoughtful questions and statements about the government role in drug trafficking and the inadequacy of the CIA's internal investigation to attempts by aging leftists to incite the crowd to violence in classic police agent fashion. You know, agent provocateur, as we call them in J6, right? The most significant exchange took place when Peter Chaikin, a representative of the LaRouche movement, elicited an assurance that Deutsch would order an investigation of Bush's role. Director Deutsch, Chaikin said, "I have a very simple way that you can prove to us that you intend to get to the bottom of these allegations, and that is, the CIA in 1981 was overridden under the Reagan administration when President Ronald Reagan signed Executive Order 12333. He set up a parallel government, headed up by George Bush, for which Oliver North also worked, and they privatized U.S. intelligence. For example, Scott Weekly, who was said by the government not to be involved with the government, it turns out he was involved in a private operation as part of what is called the Bush, quote, asteroids. But you have a private network run by George Bush and Ollie North, not the CIA. You won't find the records in the CIA. They're not there. They're in these privatized intelligence agencies. Will you pursue that? Will you pursue Ollie North and George Bush and the massive documentation? When Chaikin concluded by declaring that Ricky Ross is doing George Bush's time, audience members exploded into cheers and applause. When Representative McDonald then tried to move ahead without having Deutsch respond, members of the audience shouted, "Answer the question." Deutsch finally responded by saying, quote, I instruct our Inspector General to investigate any allegation in this matter that is brought forward. If you bring forward an allegation to me, I will see that it is investigated." Chaikin rose, announcing, quote, "I have it right here," and handed up the documentation. Again, the room rang with shouts of approval and applause. The material included EIR's special report on drug kingpin George Bush. The extent to which EIR's charge that Bush was the 1980s drug super kingpin has taken hold was also underscored on ABC's Nightline that evening. Host Ted Koppel had invited participants at the town meeting to stay and engage in discussion with after Deutsch left. When Koppel asked Marcine Shaw, mayor pro tem of nearby Compton, if she believed the CIA were responsible for the flood of cocaine, she pointed to Bush. Quote, "Not this particular CIA under Mr. Deutsch. It goes further than that," she said. Quote, "Mr. Bush, as the vice president, set up two committees, one of them headed by Ollie North, way back, that really got all this started. Yes, in my mind and from information I've seen from people I've talked to, yes, it did happen, sir." It's another little interesting note, and then I'll move on. Bush's name has also been raised in one of the first questions to Deutsch, in which the questioner noted that Reagan had put Bush over the CIA, and he asked if there were a connection with the firing of the striking air flight controllers, which the questioner suggested permitted drug flights to come back into the United States from Central America more easily. "We're stopping at the CIA," he said, "but it looks like Reagan and Bush had something to do with it," quote unquote. That's just a part of the story that I had never thought of, that the air controller strike may have been, I mean, the firing of the air controllers after that strike may have really made it easier for the drug flights to come into the country. Certainly, George Bush's name is all over this stuff. All right, so this is the coup, the ongoing coup, and by creating things that people are going to forget about, like Executive Order 12333, and then expanding what used to be a office directed by President Kennedy to take away special ops and control them for the government, for President Kennedy. They turned it into a kind of a secret government that engages private resources in order to achieve goals of the principles behind the sacred government, not goals of the United States or the people of it. So now I want to move on to a 1989 article from EIR. It's by an EIR investigative team, and I'll share this one with you too. Iran Gate, the secret government, and the LaRouche case. And of course, the LaRouche case is tied up in this. And the way that LaRouche was treated shows us, that how desperate they were and how desperate they still are to keep these facts from reaching the general public. So that's why I'm reading them. I want you to be able to be conversant in 1233, 333, the crack uh, epidemic, Iran-Contra, and George H.W. Bush's role, which I can't emphasize enough. In November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas by multiple snipers acting in complicity with the, quote, secret government, unquote, of the United States, which included McGeorge Bundy and William Bundy of the National Security Council. The death of Kennedy and the ensuing failure to publicly expose those who had ordered and abetted his assassination. Undo the coup, folks. Undo it. Undo it now. We can't wait any longer. We're stepping stones on the way to the creation of the secret government's present lawless, authoritarian police state regime in the United States. After the Kennedy assassination, a number of well-known U.S. public figures, including Earl Warren of the Supreme Court, Allen Dulles, the former director of the Langley, Virginia headquartered CIA, and future President Gerald Ford, lent their names to a blatant and incredible cover-up issued under the aegis of President Johnson's Warren Commission. Reestablishing truth and legality against the lies and distortions of the Warren Commission was made more difficult by the death and disappearance of scores of possible witnesses, starting with the liquidation of the accused assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. In the years after the Kennedy assassination, thoughtful observers of the American political scene have been aware of a massive increase in the power of a behind-the-scenes, unconstitutional secret government, parentheses, or alternatively invisible government or parallel government, which actually controls the actions of the visible elected officials. Public awareness of the secret government has been enhanced above all by the activities of the leading principled political opponent of the secret government inside the United States, Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr. Over 20 years, LaRouche has waged an implacable struggle to expose and dismantle the machinery of the invisible government, seeking to restore the processes of government as mandated by the U.S. federal Constitution. And that's the mission here at McDuff Lives as well. I don't always agree with things that LaRouche and his organization and the Schiller organization, I don't always agree with their policies about a number of things that I won't get into right now. But as far as the facts of why, how, and the details of how our government got subverted and stays subverted today, these are great resources. Exemplary for this are LaRouche's attacks on Henry Kissinger, a public figure who has also represented one of the leading operatives for the secret government forces. The secret government, for its part, has recognized in LaRouche the leader of the anti-totalitarian opposition, the only figure with the intellectual and programmatic stature to become the fixed pole around which a national resistance against the CIA fascist gangsters of the invisible government could be assembled. The same invisible government officials who are most deeply implicated in Iran-Contra gun running and drug running and the Iran Gate cover-up are precisely the ones who have taken part in illegal enemies list operations against LaRouche and his political co-thinkers. These officials include the late director of DCI, William Casey, Oliver North, General Richard Secord, Oliver Revel of the FBI, Leo Chern of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Project Democracy ideologue Roy Godson, Bush Vice Presidential Advisors C. Boyden Gray, Donald Gregg, and others. Without an overturning of the frame-up verdicts against LaRouche and his friends, a return to constitutional legality in the United States is impossible. This will require a thorough probe of the office staff and files of former Vice President Bush, now President of the United States. Part of the dismantling of the secret government is the freeing of LaRouche and his associates, one of whom, Rochelle Asher, has been sentenced to 86 years in jail for the alleged crime of soliciting political loans. LaRouche himself was convicted on spurious conspiracy charges in the federal court in Alexandria, Virginia, on December 16, 1988. On January 27, 1989, LaRouche was given a draconian 15-year sentence by Judge Albert V. Bryan, Jr. Judge Bryan is a notorious CIA-friendly judge, running the rocket docket, as we used to call it, when I practiced law over there in Alexandria, Virginia. The Eastern District of Virginia is probably the most CIA-friendly district outside the District of Columbia. And Judge Bryan was one of those very, very conservative judges, notorious for many decisions. Secret government widely recognized. The existence of an illegal secret government has been widely recognized. Senator David Boren of Oklahoma, the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, used these phrases in several interviews in 1987 after his committee had completed a preliminary inquiry into the Iran-Contra scandal. The New York Times referred to the, quote, Project Democracy, quote, conspiracy of the CIA, the Marine Corps, and the National Security Council, mentioned in the notebooks of Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North as a, quote, private secret government, unquote, in its leading editorial of February 17, 1987. This secret government is increasingly recognized as a, quote, powerful, sinister force responsible for covert operations, assassinations, political coups d'etat, psychological warfare, gun running, and drug running in many countries around the world. The perpetration and cover-up of the Iran-Contra scandal bears many ominous similarities to the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination. The real nature of the Iran-Contra was shielded from public view by the Presidential Commission appointed by Reagan and composed of former Texas Senator John Tower, former Maine Senator and Secretary of State Edmund Muskie, and retired General and former NSC advisor Brent Scowcroft. The Tower Board, in its report submitted in February of 1987, totally ignored the pervasive role of then Vice President Bush and his personal staff in Contra operations, while ludicrously assigning all the blame to Reagan's White House Chief of Staff, Don Regan. Some believe that Bush intended to reward Tower for his services and inextricably bind their political destinies by appointing Tower to head the Pentagon, with results that are known. There then followed the lengthy congressional hearings organized by Senator Inouye and Rudman and Lee Hamilton and Richard Cheney, respectively. After the failure of the Tower nomination, Bush was able to place Cheney in command at the Pentagon. Wow. So, do you see? It's kind of Bush to Cheney. And then Cheney runs like 9/11, right? This is the secret government. It's all right here in black and white. Then there's the trial of Oliver North in federal district court for the District of Columbia, presumably to be followed by the trials of Admiral Poindexter, who was North's superior, invisible government gun runner, and retired General Richard Secord, and arms dealer Albert Hakim. These cases are being prosecuted not by the U.S. Department of Justice, but by the independent counsel, Lawrence Walsh. During the conflicts between North's defense lawyer, Brendan Sullivan, I'm not a potted plant, remember? Brendan Sullivan, and the Justice Department about the degree to which classified and secret documents may be used by North's defense, Attorney General Thornburg, an asset of the Mellon family of Pennsylvania, has repeatedly intervened to narrow the scope of the inquiry. Even so, documents released have once again implicated Bush in direct participation in illegal arrangements by which the Reagan Bush administration offered increased foreign and military aid to a dozen or more countries in exchange for a commitment that those countries deliver part of the increase to the Contra drug runners in Nicaragua. Also, in parallel to the Kennedy cover-up is the slaughter of witnesses and accomplices. Over 20 persons with established or suspected connections to the Iran-Contra operations have died over the past several years. Numerous persons with links to Irangate have been indicted on various accusations, in many cases, transparent frame-ups. The cover-up of Irangate involves the large-scale liquidation of invisible government assets, variously belonging to the Langley-headquartered CIA, Project Democracy, and other components which have been compromised. In the aftermath of the Iran-Contra scandal, the invisible government has reared up the Bush regime, which, unless present trends are radically altered, is likely to preside over the first further transformation of the U.S. internal regime from the level of an authoritarian police state to one of a full-blown totalitarian fascist nightmare. This is likely to be accompanied by a further worsening of the drug plague, exacerbated by activities of the invisible government and its foreign allies. Further, despite the peace in our time propaganda, which the secret government has favored, the Kissinger balance of power policies in vogue under the Bush administration have astronomically increased the probability of regional wars in the Middle East and other areas, which in turn could lead to a new world conflict. Is that not where we are right now, today? The secret government, the invisible government, the one that killed Kennedy to take over, they're the ones that have put all of this in train. A British policy choice. The worst misunderstanding that could impede insight into the U.S. secret government would be to regard it as an exclusively or primarily national phenomenon, or to focus on the narrow question of the illegalities as such. The directions of politics, economics, and strategy which dominate the U.S. secret government's deliberations are, to a decisive degree, determined by the policy choices of the elite of Great Britain and the other countries that were once part of the British Empire. In May 1982, at the height of the U.S. assistance to the UK in waging the Malvinas War, that's the war in Argentina for the islands, in waging the Malvinas War in violation of the Monroe Doctrine, you think about it, it was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine to allow the European power, Great Britain, to come in and control the outcome of a South American country's property. At least they claimed it was theirs. Henry Kissinger, the most celebrated foreign policy operative of the secret government, solemnly acknowledged that he had been a British asset throughout his career. In fact, I think he got knighted. At a lower operational level, the various cover-up investigations into Iran-Contra seem to present the United States as acting primarily in cooperation with Israel in support of the pro-Iranian policy of the circles around General Sharon. While these Israeli connections are huge and real, the attention given them has tended to mask a deeper level of truth. The geopolitical conception behind the arming of Iran derives from British strategy. The policy of overthrowing the Shah of Iran and bringing Khomeini to power, pursued by the Canadian-trained Carter National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, was nothing but a version of plans circulating in the British Foreign Office under the designation of the Bernard Lewis Plan for the partition and balkanization of the areas of the area from the Middle East to India and Bangladesh. The patrons of the Iran policy turn out to be a group in the British House of Lords, including Lord Kaiser, Lord, guess who? Drumroll, Victor Rothschild. Other assets of the Duke of Kent's Scottish Rite Freemasonry and their factotum, Tiny Roland. If one examines the control wires on the canonical Israeli participants in Iran Gate, more often than not, one will discover a more or less direct link to Tiny Roland and his proprietors in the circles around the British royal family. Executive Orders 12333 and 12334. The present foreign and domestic reign of terror by the secret government was made possible by Reagan's issuance of EO 12333 and 12334, both signed on December 4th, 1981. These two executive orders allowed the creation of a complex of secret activities by private agencies effectively beyond the reach of public law. Under the provisions of these executive orders, numerous U.S. allies, such as Panama, have been illegally subverted, the government of the Philippines overthrown, and foreign governments, including the USSR, the UK, and Israel, were able to take control over parts of U.S. policymaking. The foremost example of the growth of lawless private intelligence functions under EO 12333 and 4 has been, quote, Project Democracy, unquote, whose name derives from President Reagan's speech delivered in the London Guildhall in 1982. The idea for Project Democracy originated in the meeting of the Trilateral Commission in Tokyo, May 1975, which, among other things, discussed the Brzezinski, Samuel Huntington, Michel Crozier, Joji Watanuki ungovernability of democracy thesis. Yeah, we can't handle it. We can't be, a republic. We can't do it. We need fascism. That's what we need. And also chose Jimmy Carter to be the next president of the United States. In the autumn of '83, Congress created by law the National Endowment for Democracy as a private foundation financed by congressional appropriation of public funds through the State Department and the United States Information Agency. You should listen to Mike Benz talking about the National Endowment for Democracy as a CIA cutout and all the things that they have done over the past 40 years. The NED was, by 1987, functioning as a private or ersatz CIA, funding 250 political projects, destabilizing the Philippines, Mexico, Korea, Panama, Colombia, and getting implicated in running drugs and guns. Project Democracy's program has nothing to do with everyday notions of democracy, but rather prescribes a pro-Soviet Malthusian ecologist, universal fascist corporate state. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Malthusian, that means limiting population, eugenics. Ecologist, meaning the use of the green revolution to affect the goals of the Malthusians. Universal fascist means the whole world comes under the rule of a fascist government. Corporate state, meaning, of course, a state run by corporations, dominated by international cartels. I would add the word oligarchs. We're right there, folks. That's where we're at right now. Kissinger and Walter Mondale were founding members of the NED board with the heads of both parties. The board has thus been compared to a grand council of secret government fascism. Oliver North's notebook and flowcharts detailed a money laundering, drug and arms trafficking, and covert actions capability, which North referred to as Project Democracy. This Project Democracy and the NED are substantially identical. Yet the United States Congress, controlled by the secret government and blackmailed by the omnipresent FBI secret political police. has refused to cancel the funding of the lawless Project Democracy. CIA old boys networks, the foot soldiers, mercenaries, adventurers, soldiers of fortune, pilots, arms dealers, roustabouts, and other players who populate the Iran-Contra operational stage tend to be drawn from the CIA's old boys networks. For example, the personnel and activities of the Theodore Shackley Thomas Klein's network have been detailed in court papers prepared by the Christic Institute for a federal lawsuit against the Shackley Klein's enterprise. While details of the Christic lawsuit may be erroneous, the following general lines are alleged in numerous published accounts. The Old Boys Network in question represents CIA covert operations capabilities, which have developed through tunnel operations in West Berlin in the early 60s, drug running in Indochina during the 60s and 70s, drug running and assassination in the Caribbean, and gun running and drug running in North Africa, the Middle East, and Iran during the last 3 decades. One typical operation of these networks was Air America, the CIA proprietary airline that transported drugs in Laos and the rest of Indochina during the Vietnam War era. A surprisingly large number of the pilots who carried out Iran-Contra deliveries during recent years are veterans of Air America. The capability is still around in the form of Southern Air Transport, the CIA airline that delivered arms to the Contras, and Contra drug shipments into the United States. The Contras themselves are best seen as yet another drug trafficking permutation of the Old Boys Network. Well, I am on page 5 of 16 pages. This article is called Irangate, the Secret Government and the LaRouche Case, and I highly recommend that you read the whole thing. I'm going to stop there and make a few comments to wrap it up today. You know, people who have voted for, supported President Trump have put up with a lot of flack. Many of them have ended up incarcerated after J6 for incredibly long periods of time, ignoring the fact that what happened was set up, that there were agents provocateurs, that there were people inside that wanted it to happen and made it happen, and that it was done in order to stop the vote to confirm the election, so that they never had to face the idea that somebody might bolt and vote not to confirm it. That's the way I see it, and I've been studying it for some time. The presidency of this country is controlled by the secret government. The foreign policy of this country is controlled by the secret government. What's happening now, as our government incorporates so-called artificial intelligence into its functions, and we see an example cited just yesterday of the danger of that, where a software company wanted to have a clause in the contract with the government that said that this software cannot be used without a human observer being part of the chain, and cannot be used to assassinate people. I believe that's the summary of it. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of that software company, but President Bush, President Trump roundly uh, uh, fired them and made sure that nobody's ever going to hire that company again in the US government. Then what happens? They use AI to target the missiles that they're firing into Iran. And what does one of them do but hit a girls' school and kill those little girls? It now have made a huge public relations problem for the United States. We are right on the cusp of this secret government turning all of its decision making that has to do with us over to AI while they can sit behind the curtain and scheme ways to further rob us and further enrich themselves and to enhance the power of the secret government that is very near to controlling the entire world. Undo the coup. You know, we have to do it. It is essential, just like was said about the LaRouche case. And I agree that LaRouche should be exonerated. I would testify that, in my opinion, LaRouche should be exonerated because he provided such a public service in organizing and publishing Executive Intelligence Review and all of the great writers that we read now, but wouldn't have had the chance to without Mr. LaRouche's dedication to opposing totalitarianism, to opposing the secret government. And it's 12 noon, so it's time to let you guys go on to the next show or have some lunch or whatever you're going to do. I'm going to go and eat some lunch myself. Thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you tomorrow for St. Patrick's Day.